Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Brian Roten, senior reporter for Hotel News Now, and I'm here with Robert Braun, co-chair of Jeffrey Mengel's Butler and Mitchell's Cybersecurity and Privacy Group. We're going to discuss a lawsuit that's been filed against Accor Management by a California resident who alleges that Fairmont Hotels and Resorts website allowed social media platforms to access their private information. So, Robert, thanks so much for being here today. To get us started, can you give us an overview of what this complaint is that's been filed with the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California?
Sure. So, well, first of all, thanks very much for bringing me here and letting me be here. The claim was brought against by an individual in California, resident of California, who had used the Fairmont website. Fairmont, of course, is part of the Accor hotel group, and they used the website to make reservations. They later claimed that in the course of making those reservations, information was, and personal information or information that could be converted into personal information was transferred to Facebook, and that they then received communications, mainly in the form of advertisements from Facebook. And they complained that they never gave permission to Fairmont to share any information with Facebook or presumably with anyone else. The way that they claimed the information was shared was through a pixel. And a pixel is, well, your computer screen is full of pixels.
Right.
A
Everyone knows
pixel,
pixels that way.
right? But a pixel here is an invisible image that lets a website call another business and share some information with it. So in this case, when the plaintiff here, Natalie Gianni, clicked on the website, that triggered a pixel to transfer certain information, to some meta information about her computer, about her operating system, things like that, to Facebook. Facebook then was able to use its capabilities, which are phenomenal, to turn that information into a lot of personal information about about Ms. Gianni. This is automatic sharing, and that's the key issue here, that she didn't know, she didn't give permission, she couldn't see that information was being shared, but it was shared with him. That turned into a lawyer helping her craft, or perhaps beginning to craft from the outset, a complaint that this violated the California Invasion of Privacy Act. Now, that's an act which was designed many years ago to prevent wiretapping, basically. And that says that, in short, that and some other laws in California say that you can't listen in on a conversation, you can't record a conversation unless all the parties to the conversation agree with it. That's why when you'll often get a phone call from some service and they'll say, or this conversation is being recorded for quality assurance purposes. That's in order to comply with SIPA. If you say quickly enough, as I often do, that no, I don't do recorded conversations, they'll either stop and say, okay, no conversation, or they'll turn off the recording. So SIPA was adopted to address electronic surveillance, which is what we would normally associate with wiretapping, recording a conversation. But the language is so broad that lawyers have been able to extend that to this kind of activity, to a pixel being triggered, being fired, and transmitting certain information to a third party, in this case, Facebook. And there are an awful lot of these cases. This happens to be one that was a fairly high profile one and brought against Fairmont, which is a well-known company, and it seeks damages and things like that. So,
Gotcha. So, I mean, we've seen in recent years, out of the European Union, their extensive, consumer privacy protection laws. We know California has its own. So how does the California invasion of privacy, how does that compare? Does that fit in with the consumer protection, or is this generally more just about the, as you said, the electronic surveillance?
Well, it's been turned into a consumer protection matter. Okay,
Gotcha.
that's similar to a lot of statutes which are being used now. Another one, for example, is the Video Privacy Protection Act, which was adopted in connection with the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court, and that in the course of the hearings, someone brought up his history of renting videos from Blockbuster, which some of the people on this podcast may be old enough to remember. And out of that, somebody said, well, that's not fair. So we're going to prevent Blockbuster and other video rental companies from sharing data about people unless you agree. Well, what's happened since then is now they've turned the same kind of thing. If you hit a pixel associated with a video, and that sends information to a third party, Facebook or wherever it may be, then they'll say, well, that's actually a violation of the VPPA, the Video Privacy Protection Act. And so there are a lot of these. SIPA is very popular, sort of a flavor of the day. Now, I want to mention something which is really a key issue, and which you brought up, at least obliquely, is the European Union.
Mhm.
So the European Union runs under the GDPR, the
Right.
General Data Protection Act. It's not a privacy act, it's a data protection act. But
Right.
one of the things that's different from in the EU from almost everywhere in the United States, some states are starting to adopt it, is a concept of an opt-in versus an opt-out. Now, in California and other states, you can opt out of someone sharing your data, recording your data, things like that. And
Mhm.
that's you'll often see in connection with a cookie policy. So there'll be a
Right.
banner, and there'll be things that say we share your information, you accept or you reject, and things like that. The EU is very different. The EU is an opt-in policy, and that means that you cannot collect any information until the website visitor agrees that you can. So what does that mean? Well, it means that in the United States, most websites are set to collect information at the beginning. And so from the very moment you go to a website, it's firing pixels, it's issuing cookies, things like that, unless you've set your browser not to do so. And it can do that until you tell it, no, stop. In the European Union, everything is off. Think of it as an on-off switch. So that switch is turned to off. And until you say, yes, I want to share the information, or yes, and in the better websites, you'll see that there are different gradations of sharing. Until that point, it'll stay off. And later on, you can turn it on, or you can turn it on. You can think of it either one switch for all the information, all the types of cookies and pixels, and others might have 4 or 5 different switches because you'll have functional and you'll have data sharing and you have advertising pixels or cookies and things like that. So it's to be aware of. People should be aware that in the United States, information is being collected from the moment you click onto a site.
Gotcha. So given that that is, the standard here in the US, how aware even are, companies that this is happening, since it's, it's a, kind of it seems like automatic. If I'm a hotel company with a website that allows you to book, since I'm building the website, I should be aware that, you know, Facebook or X or other, social media platforms would be able to have access to through that, or is that just something that it's just kind of it happens?
Well, so there are a lot of points at which these can get added,
Okay.
but the first point is the website design itself. So website designers design these sites, and some websites will be designed, and that's because either this is how they do it, or this is because their clients request it, are have built with privacy in mind. And in that case, they'll start with no pixels, no cookies, things like that. And then
Hmm.
you'll start looking at the cookies that you need. Almost every site has some cookies. You really need it to navigate a site. Even what we call a session cookie, which is only there for the time that you're on that site. But when you have these cookies, it knows where you've been. So when you click back, it'll know where you've been and you can click back other than trying to go through the whole thing all over again. And then there are more developed cookies. Some of them are considered functional cookies. Some are considered for advertising purposes. Some are sharing. So all those are decisions that are made. There are, however, website designers who simply put in a lot of these pixels under the assumption that that's what you'd want. And very often there is a disconnect between the company and maybe the people who are doing privacy at the company and the
Hmm.
people who are designing or the website or the marketing people who are putting together, because the privacy people should understand what's going on, but they don't always know that. It's very complicated. There's always a lot of pressure to get these things done quickly and to make them look good. And that gets into the way of the privacy by design concept. But privacy by design is probably the best way to do it. In terms of knowledge and awareness, you know, I will tell you that, well, you know, uh, this this podcast came up because I published a blog on our I'll have a pitch for the Jeffrey Mangels Butler and Mitchell Global Hospitality Group blog. And I periodically, although I am a hotel lawyer and a cybersecurity lawyer, and so when I see something that mixes those two, I definitely want to publish it.
I'm sure you've been busy in the last several years.
It's yes, it's a busy time for me. So hopefully people see that and it gets picked up. And people see these lawsuits all the time. And hopefully people are becoming aware of it. And I will tell you, the more that I visit websites, and I do a lot of that just as part of my business,
Sure.
I see more and more attention to it. I don't always see it done correctly, but I see more and more attention to it. And I think that it's an evolutionary practice where people are going to start following the rules a little bit better. The rules are always a little bit ahead of us, just like the bad actors are always a little bit ahead of us in cybersecurity, but maybe a lot ahead of us. But that's really the only way we can do it. So,
Okay. So I guess my next question then is, as we've seen with the GDPR and the other California consumer data protection acts out there, uh, those aren't just if it occurs in the EU or if it occurs in California, then it applies. It follows the citizens of the EU or California. Does the Invasion of Privacy act similarly, where does it only cover if if this happens in California, or does it follow California residences or residents wherever they go in the US?
there has to be a nexus to California. It's not
Okay.
clear, and they haven't decided whether someone who's a California resident can access a site in, let's say, trying to come up with a state that doesn't have a privacy policy right now. Idaho, say. I think they do actually, but Missouri. I'm pretty sure Missouri doesn't. But in any event, it's not clear whether it follows the individual.
Okay.
But if there is any nexus, if it's, for instance, if it's a California corporation, or if it's a company that is qualified to do business in California, that has some kind of nexus, then they're going to be looking at the CIPA and an
Gotcha.
opportunity. But it's not the VPPA, for example, the Video Privacy Protection Act is a federal statute.
Hmm.
So that's going to apply across the board.
Gotcha. So then let me ask you this. If I am a hotel company and I have some sort of nexus to the Invasion of Privacy Act, what do I need to do to either reduce or eliminate any kind of exposure I would have to, you know, liability to
Yeah. So
not
yeah,
actually, opening myself up to a similar lawsuit?
yeah. It's so. let me say that there are two things you do. There are things that are sort of on the offense. What can you do to prepare? And on the defense, what
Hmm.
do you do when it happens?
Right.
On the offensive side, on the preparation, you really should take a broad look at your privacy policy and your terms of use and how you implement those. So that means that you can't just have, in my opinion, it's not enough just to have a banner when someone visits a site that says, we collect certain information, see our privacy policy. What you
Hmm.
really need to do is to have the ability of someone to accept, reject, or to modify. And what I see on sites is that they have those three options. They're all equally prominent, and someone can accept all, reject all, or say, I want to manage. That's typically manage my privacy. And that will take you to a pop up, which shows in some greater detail what information you're collecting, along with links to your privacy policy. Um, if secondly, that companies should take an inventory of all of the cookies, pixels, trackers, and other technology that is on their site. Um, you'd be surprised when people realize how much is there, and sometimes it's put in sort of like in a construction project. You may have a marker in said, oh, here's where the nails are going to go, and you never take that marker out. There's things that come in and never leave, but it's a great moment, and there are very good programs and very good uh, consultants who can go through in depth and find all the cookies that you're using. The company then should look at that and see, what do we have, what do we really need, and what aren't we using? Because part of all this is not to collect information you don't need, not to share information unless you know about it, and to provide a cookie policy that describes it. Some companies are pretty easy. You just have to say, we collect certain types of information. But if some companies are very concerned about it, they'll actually have a description of each cookie. So that's a disclosure part. You have to look at the privacy policy to make sure that it's clear what information are collected and what you're sharing. Make sure that you've got the proper opt-outs in place. Now, that if you do all those things correctly, and by the way, I have to emphasize also on terms of use that it's
Hmm.
very important to make sure that you require that people agree to arbitration of disputes, so you don't have to go to court, and also that they waive class action claims, because that's when it gets very, very expensive for the website owner, for in this case Fairmont, and it also it increases the cost and review and reduces the return to the consumer who's making the claim, which is presumably not a valid claim. If it's a valid claim, then that's a whole different issue. But if you've done all these things, then you can. Those are ways you can protect yourself. Um, the problem is that there are a lot of people, and I live in California, which is gold mine for this. Is where lawyers come from. I think we grow them. I'm pretty sure. And yeah, somebody's got to make a living. So lawyers will make these claims often without going into the full detail of it. And that's unfortunate because you're going to have to respond to them anyway. But the important thing is if you very often you'll receive a complaint letter instead of an actual lawsuit, which is
Hmm.
good because you may be able to push it out. Um, you have to look at the letter, look at the claims, whether it's in a lawsuit or a letter, and figure out how valid are those claims. Is it possible that there is an issue? do you have did you actually implement everything that you need, and are they making valid claims? If so, then very often you're going to want to talk about settling that claim, because defending these claims is very, very expensive. And we defend a ton of these claims, and in almost every case we say, look, let's just make sure that we don't get hit, do everything we can not to get hit again, and then not to and to to and just get out of there as quickly as we can. Um, at the same time, by the way, while we're giving that advice to our clients, where I was hoping that some of these claims get up further, because the scope of SIPA, the scope of these claims have not really been tested. Yeah, it takes years for these things to get through the courts, and so we don't know. And there are contradictory statements by courts, some of which have accepted the claims, some of which has rejected them. So we've had two courts right in LA County. One said, "Yeah, go ahead, the claim. There's a claim there," and the other said, for an almost identical lawsuit, said, "No, there's no claim there." So the advice I'm giving is good for the client and bad for the industry, but hopefully it works. And you should really engage counsel with it. It's the earlier you do that, it's not just because I'm trying to get the business, but really the earlier you get there, the more that you can avoid making a misstep. And the early it's possible that you can have a better opportunity to resolve the matter cheaply. I'll tell you that our firms and other firms who do this, we actually know who brings these claims. We know what their style is and what they're likely to do, and we know whether there's someone who's just coming in for a quick, for a quick, for a quick strike, or whether someone is actually coming in who's a serious player in the area. So those are the things you can do. The preparation, the privacy preparation, which has a lot of other benefits, keeps regulators off your backs, and frankly, when people look at these sites, they know who's good and who's bad. And on the other hand, there's the defense, which basically means putting these into place, reacting quickly, and getting the right kind of advice that you need for it.
And I would ask then, the old saying, good offense is a good defense. If by taking the advice that you mentioned and you have these, the pop-ups to do the opting out and making the choices and having to link to that, is that usually enough of a deterrent if someone is looking to, make such a complaint? They see like, oh, well, these people have done their homework. It's time to move on and try somebody else.
Nothing is perfect, but it will definitely help.
Gotcha.
It'll definitely help. And interestingly, I think it will help with people who are serious players who are willing to put a lot of effort behind it. It honestly is not going to do as much as we'd like
Hmm.
for players who are sort of fly by night. We get a lot of pro per comments, people pro per someone who comes in on their own. They see a lawsuit, these things are all public, they take it, they change the names, and they throw it in. So if someone's not serious about it and not serious about looking into it, I'm not sure it'll always do a lot. However, you'll definitely reduce your exposure. As I said, it's not just your exposure to lawsuits.
Hmm.
When you do these things, to be very aware that regulators, certainly California, the Federal Trade Commission, attorneys general, and a lot of states are looking at privacy policies and are looking at these procedures, and will generally be, and at that point they're going to start doing investigations, testing your system, things like that. And so especially if you're a higher profile company, public companies with a real public name, it's something you really have to think about.
Yeah. I think that pretty well covers the topic here, but do you have any, final thoughts you wanted to share, any subjects we didn't cover related to this?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, and it's a
Please.
is that this is sort of it's like taking a shower or washing hair or something. It's something you don't do you don't do it once and then walk away from it. The laws are changing all the time. The attitudes are changing all the time. We try to be creative in what we think is available, and other practitioners as well. Um, but I will tell you that a privacy policy, when I look at it and stated 2022, I'll say that's out of date. It's almost certainly not compliant.
Already.
That
Wow.
yes, things happen, and new privacy laws come in every year, and all privacy laws are amended, and just the world out there has changed. I don't think that there's anything that really requires exactly what I'm suggesting in terms of a stricter, uh, more comprehensive cookie banner or privacy policy banner. But that's the kind of thing that's going to help you. We ought to be looking forward, and really, unfortunately, or better, worse, companies should be looking at this as something, like a lot of things you check every year. This is one of the things you have to consider every year, your privacy profile. Ultimately, the investment will be worth it.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to elaborate and explain the situation. It is not one that I personally know a whole bunch about, and I'm really glad to have learned more about. I mean, this case, but this law in particular.
Well, Brown, I appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm STR's Isaac Colazo.
And I'm co-stars Jan Freitag. And together we are the data geeks behind Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast on the Hotel News Now podcast network.
Every month, we bring you a fresh take on the latest hotel data, insights into the travel trends behind that performance, and the big picture topics you should be thinking about.
And we also don't mind getting into some good-natured disagreement from time to time. Hey, when Isaac and I start talking data together, anything can happen, and it usually does.
Find us on hotelnewsnow.com and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Search for Hotel News Now, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. This podcast was recorded April 8th, 2025, and produced and edited by Brian Roten.